Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Burn Your Draft, the podcast exploring the Reed College senior thesis process. I'm Ace Lackey, your podcast producer. In today's episode, you'll hear me have an international conversation with Lucas Allam about Lebanon, protest, and the very real effects of world events on a thesis.
My name is Lucas Allam. I'm a Lebanese American with Palestinian roots. I majored in history and minored in sociology at Reed, and my thesis was with Liz Metzashida in the history department, titled Class in the Maelstrom: Class, Conflict and Nationalism on the Lebanese Campus from the Six-Day War to the Lebanese Civil War. More than anything, my thesis is trying to tell a story of student protest in Lebanon during this specific period of like the late 60s, early 70s, and trying to see what we learn about how and why student protests escalated, and then what the impacts of those protests are on wider society. And I'm arguing that to understand a lot of these things, there needs to be more effort to understand class politics in them, both in the US and in Lebanon, although my thesis is about Lebanon specifically.
And you're back to living in Lebanon right now, yeah?
Yes, I am living in Lebanon and speaking to you from Lebanon right now.
Amazing. I assume this question is a bit obvious, but why did you choose to do this for your thesis?
So I've always loved history. When I was a little kid, I loved history, and it became, for me at least, a pretty great way of understanding why things were the way they were. And I came to Reed, wanted to continue learning that. And specifically, the Lebanese Civil War was something that a lot of my family lived through and had very personal, painful experiences with, and didn't talk about very much. So it was something that I wanted to understand better, and I wanted to contribute to knowing why it happened so that it didn't happen again. And because, at least in Lebanon, there's this sense of history being stuck in time. History stops before the Lebanese Civil War. It's not discussed really. I'm talking to an American audience. I should clarify that the Lebanese Civil War happened from 1975 to 1991. More or less 15 years of multiple different conflicts happening simultaneously in an area smaller than Delaware for 15 years. I remember once being asked, can you explain the Lebanese Civil War to me when I was in high school by a friend? And I was just like, no, we don't have time. There's too much.
Why did you end up choosing to go to Reed?
Reed I came to partially because I wanted to live in a different city than the one I grew up in, which was, I spent almost all of my childhood in Boston. I wanted to go to somewhere where I would be doing a lot of academic work, but I didn't really want to focus on grades, so that made sense. I could put the effort in without being obsessed with a number, I guess. And the traditions sounded fun. Yeah.
Oh, so the same reasons I went here.
Yeah, I feel like it's a pretty common answer.
So what skills did you acquire or strengthen during the thesis process?
So many. I spent so much time just writing, so I improved a lot as a writer in the process. In terms of new skills, I ended up doing a lot of archival research that I'd never really done before, and so for that reason, I learned about the methods and the process behind that. I also ended up putting a ton of effort into just broader research methods, many of which I didn't use. I actually took human subjects researcher training in case I got the opportunity to interview people, but that didn't end up happening.
What did the average day of working on your thesis look like beyond just, sitting there writing?
The average day of working on my thesis did look like me sitting there writing or reading. In the library exclusively. I had this great little spot in the basement of the North Stacks where nobody ever went to. So there was just this one window a little above my head, and I had no one around. Sometimes I didn't even have to put earbuds in to listen to music because there was literally no one in the room. And I would sit there and I would read and I would write and I would just be going through. On the computer where I'm talking to you from right now, I have maybe thousands of files that I downloaded on this computer, and I would just be going through file after file saying, okay, does this have anything that I need to talk about? And the other thing that happened most often in thesis writing was me talking to someone in Lebanon and being like, because I had a friend who I can get into this more later when we talk about the difficulties in thesis writing, but I ended up having to hire a research assistant in Lebanon to get stuff for me. So yeah, thank you, Laura Yunus, that made this entire thing possible. So a lot of what else I was doing was just talking to her and being like, okay, let's discuss what I need to get and what the process for doing that is.
What advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of the thesis process?
What advice would I give to myself? Honestly, more than anything, the biggest piece of advice that I would have for myself going back is you need to put all your notes in one place. I took so many notes on so many different books and various newspaper articles, and I got to a point when I was trying to write the core body of the thesis where I realized that I had not ever concentrated them in a single location, and I spent an embarrassingly long amount of time figuring out where I put various notes and turning that into a digital document where I could word search. Because it would be things like, I would remember, I remember that there's this book by Samir Qasir that talks about a specific aspect of the history of Beirut, and I want to find that. But that book is 800 pages long, and I don't remember where my notes from that are.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all as somebody that also prefers to take physical notes when I'm doing my readings.
Here's the thing, if I typed them the first time around, I wouldn't remember to look for it, but if I don't type them up after I write them down physically, I won't know where I put it.
Exactly.
So yeah, consolidate your notes.
What were the unexpected challenges in the thesis process, and how did you deal with them?
I think I have a rather unusual one, which is that I had two major difficulties. The first one, that I did not speak Arabic very well, was honestly easier to handle. There's a lot of stuff in Lebanon that's in English and French, both of which I speak fluently, and I had support from people who speak Arabic much, much better than I do. So that I was able to work around. What was a much bigger problem was that I had intended to go to Lebanon during the winter break in order to visit certain archives in person. This became impossible when Israel invaded the country in October. It really ruined my plans and was also just emotionally devastating, and I don't really think I got very much work done in October that wasn't absolutely essential. Obviously, the change in how I was expecting to get sources made a huge difference. I didn't necessarily want to focus on campus politics specifically. I was interested in social class as motivation for a social class and conflicts between social classes as a motivation for escalation in protests in Lebanon. And so I wasn't necessarily thinking of focusing on students specifically. However, when I couldn't go to Lebanon, there was a lot less time I had to look for things that I knew I wanted. There was also the fact that one of the archives I wanted to look at was in a town that was on the front lines, and that would have been a great resource for stuff pertaining to like agricultural labor movements, because it was a personal archive of someone whose family had been involved in that in the past during the period of study that I had. But, you know, he fled his home, and so I wasn't able to get any of that stuff. And then the second issue is the time it took to get a grant from Reed's undergraduate research grants committee, and then go through the paperwork to have Reed pay someone in another country and get all that set up, meant that I didn't have that much time to actually look through archives in Lebanon. And so I basically just went for, I'm going to just write with what the most easily accessible stuff is. And what that was student protests and on-campus activities, because there are good archives and collections of that material specifically. And so it's much easier to work with that. And so it ended up being much more campus-focused, and that was the first major surprise. The second thing that I think was a huge surprise for me was I expected questions of class and economic issues to sort of be obviously their own thing. You have these massive protests over tuition hikes in Lebanon, where students fully occupied campuses and clashed with police. And I expected those to have a very distinct focus on class. And instead what you found was every single time you had an issue related to Arab nationalism or Palestinian struggle against Israel's occupation to the south, it became about class issues in Lebanon. And every single time something about class issues in Lebanon, if it's tuition, if it's access to the university for non-students, somehow it would always link back to Palestinian struggle and to Arab nationalism again. And so it created this dynamic of a sort of inseparability that I didn't expect to be the main thing I was talking about. Because ultimately, my conclusion is that you can't talk about these independently because for people in Lebanon in this period, they were so linked that they wouldn't talk about them independently.
So why is this thesis important? Who will this impact?
I hoped to do something for people in Lebanon specifically that helps to address unanswered questions and stalled reforms after the Civil War, and to sort of explain and understand why there is this strong affiliation between people's economic interests and then issues of religious sect or nationalism. And I wanted to provide more of a window into why those are connected. And I think that that is something that is very present in Lebanon and very important in Lebanon. Constantly you see these issues get conflated here, but I think it's also something that happens elsewhere. And I think understanding what connects economic and nationalist issues is really important, and looking at how student movements connect to those is very important. And with the US specifically, there have been a lot of student movements that have also done similar, if admittedly less escalated, actions in the past year that merged issues of nation and national liberation with like domestic policy in the US and how people wanted campus to be run. And so I think if you're trying to understand why protests always seem to talk about way more than the inciting incident that caused them, I think I have at least a partial window into why that is.
How do you think your thesis experience will inform your life after Reed?
So I wanted to expand on what I wrote and moved to Lebanon for many reasons, but one of those is because I am slowly working towards making a book that covers this subject in more detail, not just the campuses, but also tries to look at industrial protest in the impoverished suburbs of Beirut, to look at the agricultural conflicts that were happening at the same time, and try and get something that's a little broader than just these few campuses in the capital city.
So your plans for this summer and then the few years beyond are just that, working on your book over there?
Not just that. That's what most directly relates to my thesis. I'm also just looking for a job here. But yeah, that is a big project for the next couple of years at least. Because I think I ended this thesis process and I was like, oh, I haven't actually used a third of what I wanted, of what I had available, and there's so much more to talk about. And I want to see my friend's archives now that he's able to be in his home again, you know? There's just, there's a lot to be said about this, and not that many people have written about this, at least this aspect of what was happening at the period. So it feels like something useful to do.
In 30 years, what will go through your mind when you read your thesis?
My God, my writing's so bad. Absolutely. I was rereading a couple sections of it maybe 2 weeks ago, and just started editing my own work from 2 months ago, because when you're writing the thesis and you have the kind of crunch that I had with how delayed I was in being able to get sources, and it's already only meant to be a year, and you're writing page after page, there's so much of your writing that just doesn't get polished. And so more than anything, I think I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, I can't believe I wrote that sentence. There's maybe 6 things that are wrong with it. I don't regret doing it. I'm so glad I did it. But I also know that that's going to be my first thought if I open up my copy. It's just going to be immediately to there should be a comma there.
What advice do you have to listeners who are either starting Read or starting their own thesis?
I'm going to do a thesis specifically because I think that's what's fresher in my mind, and honestly, people hear less. The going into college stuff, people talk your ear off about it as you're going into college, but for the thesis, the first thing, consolidate your notes. Dear God, it will save you so much time. Consolidate your notes. If you want to do any specific kinds of research, I really recommend getting the training as early as possible. The faster you know what looking through archives is like, the faster you can just start doing that. The faster you know what the ethics standards are for interviews, the faster you can just start doing that. Maybe first month. That should be first month of the process. Once you have your idea, figure out what you need to do and what sort of training you need to do it, and get that out of the way. Oh yeah, and just one last thing. Ask for help. Trust me on this. Even if you think, I could probably deal with it on my own, it's just going to be a pain, just ask for help. Literally whoever can help you with it. Yes, your advisor, absolutely your advisor. Talk to your advisor. But if there's someone you know can help you with something, it's okay to just ask. A thesis is a collaborative process, even if it has your name on it.
Looping into that, we are at the last and some would argue the most important question. Is there anyone you want to thank or acknowledge for helping you with your thesis?
There's so many people. There's my advisor, Liz Matsushita, obviously. There's Michael Young, who helped me figure out what to read at the very early stages of this, because he'd read all of it. There's my friend Rani Bazze, who got displaced and had to leave his home, but still helped me find sources anyway. My parents did a lot for me as well. My roommates did a lot of cooking for me during this process, which I'm incredibly appreciative to. Hoda, the Middle East Reading Room librarian at the Library of Congress, was also an immense help. And finally, most importantly, the person I hired as my research assistant, Lara Yunus, is the only reason I was able to get the sources I needed from Lebanon, and so the only reason, and the most important reason, I was able to write what I did write. So thank you to all of those people. There simply would have been nothing without them.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, but that's Lebanon. No plan ever fully is completed. Everything has to be improvised halfway through.
If you have any final notes, I guess you can say those now.
Yes, I guess my main thing is I have done a bit of just complaining and saying, that's how things are in Lebanon and whatnot. I know that's probably going to get cut out, but I guess that's not the first thing I want someone to be hearing me talking about Lebanon, if it's just in the context of, there's this podcast. That sounds like an interesting thing to read. Maybe I'll hear what they have to say. Otherwise, thank you. Hope that ends up giving you enough to make it sound good, and I appreciate it.
We are super appreciative to have you. Thanks so much, Lucas, both for the interview and your amazing patience with technical difficulties over international Zoom calls that our listeners, fortunately, don't have to experience. I hope that you're still safe and well over there and making good progress on your book. If you, the listener, enjoyed today's interview, I hope you'll join us again to hear from more students and alumni about what it means to burn your draft. Be sure to subscribe, check out our X, Facebook, and Instagram pages, and write a review on Apple Podcasts. Burn Your Draft is a production of Reed College and the Center for Life Beyond Reed. Created jointly by students, alumni, and staff, this episode was produced and engineered by me, Reed College student Ace Lackey. Our executive producer is Seth Paskin, class of 1990, with technical advising from Joe Janiga. Our project manager is Nate Martin, staff member and class of 2016. Music by Jack Salvucci, class of 2020, and podcast art by alumni Henry Gottschlich and Lillian Pham. This podcast was made possible by a gift from Seth Paskin.